This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Well, it's always reassuring to know that the day after AEW Dynamite, the bulk of the wrestling talk is on a failed indie event from a company that no one's ever heard of before. And the entire premise of the discussion being, just because you can sign a bunch of ex-WWE talent doesn't mean they're going to sell tickets or draw you any money. A rather odd comment coming from the same people that support a wrestling product right now that is mostly noted for signing a bunch of ex-WWE talent to contracts, thinking that they're going to draw money or sell tickets. Funny how that works. Now, granted, we can at least concur on the point that Bryan Danielson and FTR are better ex-WWE talent than, say, Nia Jax or Lana or Mojo Rawley, or whatever other list of names that were initially advertised for that event. Again, the fact that nobody was even really talking about whatever the project was called, Wrestling Entertainment Series. Yeah, that was going to put butts in the seats. Let's try and sell a product to internet fans when you've got the word entertainment in your company name. Yeah, that'll go over well. Whatever. I mean, there's already enough bad wrestling for people to tune into every week, so it's not like this is going to be a detriment to the business in any way. Granted, some of those former WWE names are out of a payday, which is unfortunate, but, you know, when you think about it in hindsight, maybe it's a sign that when you're noticing that even if you worked in WWE at one point, just because your face is plastered on a poster somewhere, it doesn't mean that people are going to want to dish out money to buy a ticket to watch you wrestle. Especially not some of the people I saw advertised for that show anyway. Good Lord. Talk about rating the indie circuit for the lowest common denominator. But that is not what we're here to discuss today on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. We're here to talk about the other bad product that's currently happening on Wednesday night. And in addition to recapping Dynamite, we will also be continuing with our World Class Championship Wrestling review as part of the Friday Retro Review series. But let's do a little bit of housework before we get going. If you're new to checking out the FSWR show, make sure to subscribe, comment, and like the show for me. We are here on Rumble and YouTube each Monday and Friday. Going to be making some modifications to the Monday show going forward, which I will be discussing in length at the end of this particular episode, so stay tuned for that. But we do have a lot to get going with the two shows we are going to be reviewing today, so let us start with the usual, AEW Dynamite. Swear, man, every time I watch this show, it feels like a constant example of how can AEW manage to out WCW WCW? Baffling decision after baffling decision that just leave you shaking your head. And whereas at least WCW had some legitimate star power back in the day to mask some of the obvious booking flaws, AEW doesn't even have that right now, because all their big stars are either injured or written off of television. So we begin with the TNT Championship Street Fight with Wardlow and Scorpio Sky. And whereas we used to ask questions such as, why was this a street fight for no reason? Now the question is, why not make this a street fight for no reason? You know, just giving the heels incentives to interfere for the entirety of the match because it's no DQ, which then also begs the question, if it is no DQ, then why didn't the entire top team faction just jump Wardlow from the opening bell? Well, the answer is these people are stupid and they don't think anything through logically enough. And speaking of them not thinking through anything logically enough, instead of making this short and sweet in a get in, get out kind of match, bell rings, Wardlow smash, powerbomb deal 1, 2, 3, no, instead they had to give it time. Because God forbid we have to protect Scorpio Sky on this show, aka the most ineffective TNT champion in company history, a complete vortex of anything remotely containing charisma, and because they ended up giving the match time, it reflected in the way the crowd responded to it. And listen, talked about this already when they were going through that period of having Wardlow fight all the big guys during the MJF program. The people don't want to see Wardlow sell. I cannot put that over enough. And it was a big issue when they were sending Wardlow out there every week to wrestle bigger guys, and they were trying to have Wardlow fight from underneath instead of just letting him go out there and beat ass. It's not that hard. All the people want to see is Wardlow wreck shop, Powerbomb Symphony, and GTFO. They don't want to see Wardlow work Flair Steamboat or Flair Sting competitive matches. Not that he can do that anyway, which is why they should be avoiding having him try and work 10-minute matches under any circumstance right now. Seriously, how hard is it for Tony Khan to just go back and watch a Bill Goldberg squash match from like the 97 to 98 period of Nitro when he was the hottest? It's the simplest fucking match concept in the world, yet for some reason it's not clicking in Tony's little pea brain. It's 1 minute, spear, jackhammer, 1, 2, 3. Doesn't need to be anything beyond that. You know? I mean, the people came alive in the last minute and a half when Wardlow finally killed Scorpio with all the power bombs, and they sure popped when he won the belt, but the preceding 10 minutes where they were giving Scorpio offense, like, completely unnecessary. And all it did was leave the fans sitting on their hands the entire time, not reacting to anything. Not that they did anything during the match that would have given people a reason to react anyway. And by the way, now that we can reflect on things after the show, why was this a street fight? Did they just add that stipulation because they needed an excuse to let top team run interference to get heat on Wardlow? In that case, why not just do a ref bump and send out the goons so Wardlow could kill them all with power bombs anyway? No, instead it's AEW logic of, well, street fights are no DQ anyway, and we need to have top team interfere at some point, so street fight it is. And trust me, I'm happy they didn't break out the plunder here. Christ almighty, after last week's torture chamber environment, I don't need to see weapons another day of my life watching a professional wrestling match. And like I noted, Wardlow winning got a big reaction, and they should have fucking done this in the first Scorpio match before the Double or Nothing show, and it probably would have gotten an even bigger reaction, but whatever. You know, they got the belt on Wardlow, and now we just wait and see what the follow-up is. I would hope this somehow leads to MJF getting involved with things again, but that's a ways down the road. Right now, for my money, they should just have Wardlow go on the Jade Cargill path of just squashing geeks in title matches every week. So then we had a promo with Jon Moxley in the Boiler Room. And why was Mox in the Boiler Room with the cameraman to cut a promo? I guess because the curtain backdrop with Tony Schiavone wasn't available at the time. He talked about Brody King. Yeah, I literally got nothing else out of it. At least things picked up with Christian Cage being an awesome douchebag. And it also hit me pretty early on in this segment while I was listening to Christian talk. How is it that I actually got behind Christian as a babyface in WWE at one point? Probably because he was feuding with that POS Randy Orton during a time where Orton was just insufferable to watch, and he was needlessly beating Christian in multiple world title matches on pay-per-view and the crowd didn't want to see it. And man, that dates back almost a decade at this point. Now, looking back in hindsight, why wasn't Christian a heel for his entire career? God, this guy is great. Unfortunately, the greatness here didn't last too long because things quickly took a turn for the worse once they got Matt Hardy wedged into the equation. And look, I know this is probably not the most ideal time to be venting frustrations about the Hardys because of all the stuff that's been going on with Jeff. But seriously, does anyone want to see Matt Hardy anymore? I've been over Matt Hardy as an in-ring worker long before he ever signed a contract with AEW, but the more I see of him, it makes it that much more difficult to defend him at this point. The Hardy Boys reunion failed miserably. It was obvious that neither guy could go anymore, and it's not like Matt was riding high before Jeff showed up anyway. And I figure one of the main reasons they did this segment was so that Christian could take some shots at Jeff to get more heat. To an extent, it worked, but then you think about it after the fact and you're like, are they really going to try and involve Matt in this when it's not needed? Like, what does Matt Hardy have anything to do with the Jurassic Express split and Christian's heel turn? The promo stuff wasn't even the worst part of the segment. The worst part came afterwards where they broke out into the brawl and they did the stupid spot where Luchasaurus pins Matt Hardy against the ring post to boot him in the head. The problem being that Matt isn't actually pinned against the ring post in any way because there's nothing holding him against the post aside from apparently the Invisible Man. All Matt had to do was just move to the side to avoid getting kicked in the face, but instead he pretends like he's being restrained against his will. So that whole thing was dumb. And it also is a good reminder as to why I should always take good moments on this show with a grain of salt, because whenever AEW actually gives me something potentially good, about 90% of the time they end up ruining it with something stupid. See Bryan Danielson getting paired up with Moxley in garbage matches, or Wardlow squashing MJF on a pay-per-view only to enter a feud with a bunch of untrained security guards, or now we've got Christian's heel turn being ruined by pointlessly trying to shoehorn Matt Hardy in there. So I'm sure they'll manage to screw this one up too. Just give it a few more weeks. We had a quick highlight package of the fallout to the War Games match from last week where I swear to God, the entire premise of the promo was, this feud is not over until someone is in the grave. Okay, so we've seen a Falls Count Anywhere, anything goes, everybody do a bunch of random shit match on a pay-per-view, followed by a War Games match where the babyfaces won clean as a sheet by tapping out one of the heels. So by AEW logic, this feud must continue. Fuck you. By the way, what are you going to do, a buried alive match? I'd like to see AEW try and pull that one off. Although, I'm not going to give Chris Jericho any ideas because of the way that guy works. And then we had what I can only hope will be the last time we ever hear Jake Hager cut a promo in AEW. Good God almighty. He made Claudio look like Dusty Rhodes with his delivery by comparison. And, I mean, I love Claudio and all, but if you've ever heard that guy talk before, he's not tearing down any walls, if you know what I mean. Hager also outright name-dropped WWE at one point, which is always a great thing to hear. Worked well in WCW in the late 90s and TNA Wrestling at one point, and look how great those companies are doing right now. Oh, wait a minute. So, chugging right along here, we had Butcher and Blade versus Swerve Strickland and Limited Keith Lee. He's now been limited to the tag division and mid-card obscurity like 99% of all the other WWE crossovers. God, this match sucked. Butcher and Blade in particular were all over the place in this match. There was a horribly botched leapfrog attempt with Swerve and Blade early on where Blade clipped Swerve from underneath and both guys just stopped what they were doing and stalled for like 15 seconds. I also particularly like the spot where Keith had Blade in the corner and Butcher is trying to charge Keith for something, and then he just stopped running when Keith turned to him. Part of that was probably Keith's fault for not getting his elbow up in time, but that looked atrocious. Had a great Excalibur botch coming back from commercial where he welcomed everyone back to TNT television instead of TBS. Fucking moron. Finally, it broke down with all four guys doing a bunch of random shit until Keith and Swerve won with the Doomsday Powerbomb foot stomp thing. And then we had this afterbirth that, honest to God, I can't fully describe the levels to this. This went from the best thing on the show, then immediately dovetailed into the worst thing on the show in a split moment. And by the end, it ended up unintentionally being the funniest thing on the entire show. And also a paradigmic example of the beauty of sticking it to all the Meltzer cucks out there that are still buying all this artificial BS about the Bucks being the best tag team of all time, or even being mentioned in the rankings of the best team of all time. So let's start with the great part of the afterbirth. Out come Powerhouse Hobbs and Ricky Starks, who are just firing on all cylinders on the stick, both of them. Hobbs calling Swerve and Keith trick-ass bitches, which I laughed at, and Stark shooting straight facts that Keith and Swerve are nowhere near their level in the ring or on the stick. At one point, he shoved his FTW title for Hobbs to hold. I swear to God, I thought he was going to do a flare flop right then and there. He was so fired up. I loved everything about pissed off Hobbs and Starks. And then in a split second, as soon as they hit that Beta Bucks music, they absolutely killed this thing dead. Because then we had to hear Matt and Nick Jackson on the stick. And God almighty, they're about as fake as a $3 bill. If they were auditioning for a high school play, they probably wouldn't even be relegated to stagehands. That is how untalented and offensively phony these fucking morons are on the microphone. Between Matt Jackson and his gurgly undertone and Nick Jackson giving black holes layers of charisma, like, these guys take the piss out of everything they're involved with. I mean, you can hear it in the crowd response. Even the AEW diehards are sick of these piss ants. And no, for all you Bucks cucks out there, no, it's not good heat when these guys are getting booed on television. It's the, we're sick of you two, you guys suck, get off our fucking TVs heat. And who can blame them at this point? The promo sucked, and it was all to set up a three-way tag for next week featuring the one team that the crowd wanted to see, but that they're not going to actually see because they're not going to be involved in it. The actual best tag team on the planet. Which is where this segment actually got good again. Because the people all started an FTR chant, which you can tell noticeably pissed the Bucks off because even those jagoffs know it's true. And of course, we all know what it's setting up in the end. They're going to do FTR versus the Bucks Part 3, and the Bucks are going to go over and do everything in their power to try and sabotage Dax and Cash because they can't accept the fact that they're not the best tag team in the world, and their little fad of being over with the marks is long gone by now. And the only people that will continue to gloss over it are Dave Meltzer and all the spineless sheep that are supporting him. It's clear as the day is long that the Bucks aren't over, and FTR are well above their level in every capacity, but well, Dave just won't accept it. Because that would mean that whatever money or stock he's putting into AEW's success being carried solely by Kenny Omega and the Beta Bucks, he'd have to actually acknowledge that he was wrong, and he'd be losing money on that bet, because the bloom is off the rose with these asshats. So I hope Tony's smart enough to make sure that when they do that third match with FTR and the Bucks, he's a good enough businessman to put FTR over in that rubber match. It's the result people want to see, and it's what needs to happen for AEW's overall bottom line. And all he has to do is tell Matt and Nick Jackson to go piss up a rope if they try to convince him that it would be a better booking idea to put the Bucks over. Can he do it? I'll believe it when I see it. But Man, was it beautiful hearing the crowd shit all over the Bucks' little parade. Great stuff. So then we had Eddie Kingston doing a promo with Tony Schiavone for all of 8 seconds before it got stupid. And once again, it's not so much the concept of the angle being stupid, it's just the fact that there's nobody agenting this bullshit to nitpick details and make sure that the execution of the angle makes sense. So here's what happens. Jericho shows up on the Jumbotron while Eddie's talking, and they've got the cameraman filming the Jericho Asshole Society with Ruby Riott. And remember when we talked about the absurdity of Matt Hardy pretending that he had his head stuck against the ring post when Luchasaurus kicked him? Well, sure as shit, less than an hour later on the same show, they're doing pretty much the exact same thing with Ruby in the back, only this time it's even more absurd because Ruby has her arm apparently wedged in an open car door. Keep in mind, we don't know how she's wedged into the door frame because nobody's holding her down. All we see is Ty Conti going to slam the door into Ruby's arm while Ruby's basically just standing there in prone position. She's literally volunteering herself. Hey, my arm is perfectly exposed here. Just go right ahead and slam that car door into it. I could easily just pull my arm out of harm's way, but nope, god damn it, we got an angle to shoot. Go for it, son. So they did it, and the whole thing looked Bush League and fake. Fake as a football bat, to coin a great phrase. So that whole segment sucked. But that wasn't even the worst part of the entire show. God, I'm fired up this week. What happened next? One of the honest-to-God worst segments I've seen on AEW in a long time. And think about the ground that covers. This was offensively bad. Okay. So let's start from the top. So, for reasons that I still cannot explain to you, beyond the fact that Tony Khan just doesn't give up on bad ideas and terrible gimmicks, the job order is still a thing. And worst of all, they've got Brody's fucking kid involved. And by the way, let's just start from this premise. Why was the Dark Order out in the ring for a promo? Well, because they were in Rochester, New York, and Brody Lee's hometown is Rochester. There's literally no other reason for it. Because they like cheap pops. And isn't that ironic, by the way? The fact that the most over guy in this stupid faction after 3 years is a guy that's been dead for almost 2 years. And if anyone gives me shit for that, seriously, just go piss up a rope. Because you know it's a fact. And, I was never all that high on Brody Lee to begin with, but at least I can make some argument that when he was the leader of this group, there was at least some name power to it. Without him, it is a faction filled with outlaw indie guys that wouldn't even be working job matches on OVW television back in the day. But it gets worse. Because now comes QT Marshall for Christ knows what reason, I have no idea. It's still one of the most baffling things I've ever heard Cornette try to sell me on back in the day, that QT Marshall was somebody that was deserving of a push in Ring of Honor. But he starts cutting a promo on, of all people in this segment, yes, the 10-year-old. And even more ridiculous, while QT's cutting a heat promo on the minor, the kid is having to be held back by one of the job order guys. Yes, a grown adult man was struggling to restrain an 80-pound child whose apparent game plan was to charge full speed up the ramp to QT Marshall and beat the shit out of him. Somehow. Of course, in AEW, I wouldn't have put it past these clowns to actually have QT sell for a 10-year-old. So, finally, at the end of this amateur hour segment, cue Hangman Page to jump QT Marshall so that the Dark Order guys could lay him out, Also, the kid could cut a dry fart promo on QT telling them that he could hypothetically pin him now, but he's going to wait until he's 18. Yes, they are going to build up to a long-term storyline for the next 8 years in order to give us the payoff of seeing Brody Lee's son pin QT Marshall in a pro wrestling match. Factoring in QT Marshall will even be wrestling in the next 8 years, much less this company even existing in the next 8 years to even see it. Oh my God. This is fucking terrible. I don't even know what to say about it. What the hell was this doing on television? Is anyone going to try and justify this? I'm sure people will, because the AEW marks are some of the biggest half-wits that exist on this fucking planet. If I'm trying to be kind, the best I could say is this did not belong on television, which seems like common sense to everyone except for the idiots running this monkey operation. But I'm not exaggerating when I say that this is the worst thing I've seen on AEW in a long time. There have been some pretty bad segments, a lot of them taking place in recent weeks, but nothing to this level. This was honest to God, legitimately, offensively terrible. This was the segment right here where if they had people teetering on whether or not to turn the show off, this was the segment that tuned people off. And the worst part, and it hit me after the segment was over, that was only hour one. There was still an hour left of this shit. Oh my God. I was so angry at this point. That was a violent drink there. Hour two. We had Penta O Screwball versus Roosh, a feud that apparently dates back 5 years from another promotion that all of 50 people are aware of. So, of course, they provide absolutely no context as to what their feud was initially about. Not that I really care anyway. And if you only watch AEW television and you don't even watch the pay-per-views, you would probably have overlooked the fact that Roosh debuted on Double or Nothing in a random backstage pre-tape with Andrade for no reason, and then he disappeared for weeks, showed up on Rampage in a battle royal for his first actual televised match, and now 2 months later, we finally get Roosh in a singles match on TV. And I actually like Roosh. I watched some of his stuff in Ring of Honor back when it was a semi-functioning company, and from what I saw of his, I mostly enjoyed it. He wasn't someone I would have considered putting my world title on if I were running a company, but he's a great athlete, has a decent look. His biggest flaw is getting sucked into the bad habits of all the flashy high offense style where there's too much no-selling and sloppiness with move execution. And I mean, putting him in there with a botchy lucha fucks ain't doing him any favors. Generally, Roosh looked good in this match. He did one of those head palm shoot-off spots that Corny hates, so I'm sure we'll hear about that in his AEW review next week. They also fought on the floor for way too long, but, I mean, if I spent time complaining about that every week on AEW, I'd be tacking on another 10-minute rant onto something that'll never be addressed. The finish sucked ass. This has become Tony Khan's newest booking fad, where anytime the Lucha Bros are on TV, they've got to do the rip-off mask angle, which, by the way, never leads to anything. It receives the droning boo response from the crowd, but who gives a crap? We see it every week now. You know, once upon a time, a luchador getting his mask ripped off was the single most disrespectful thing you could do to the guy, and it actually had consequences. You know, now we see it every segment with the Lucha Bros, and it's just a part of the segment. So this is all dumb. And for the record, no, Rush teaming up with Andrade is not going to get me to care about Andrade any more than I have since he first showed up in the company. He is still boring. So then we had the Acclaimed and the Ass Boys in an 8-man tag against some job guys, which was mostly notable for one thing. Austin and Colton being fabulous douchebags. The entire appeal of the Acclaimed's gimmick is their ring intro where Max Caster raps. So, of course, what happens here? Well, Caster goes to freestyle, and one of the guns knocks the mic out of his hand, which got a mega heat response from the crowd. They were not happy. They were not getting a Max Caster rap on this particular show. The match was what it was. Finish saw Austin get the blind tag on Caster while they were setting up for the mic drop finish. And Austin got in so he could steal the pin. I could nitpick Austin tagging Caster's foot instead of his hand, but I mean, nobody knows what tag rules are anyway, so who gives a crap? The Billy Gunn swerve at the end was great, and the announcer sold it like a fart in church, which was stupid. But they got me. I totally bought the idea that Billy was going to align with the Acclaimed, and sure enough, he laid out Caster and Bowens after the bell and raised his son's hands. So blood is thicker than water, I guess. So we'll see where everything goes. I will say this. I have a lot of high hopes for Austin and Colton in the next year or so. You know, they need more ring exposure. They're very green right now, but they've got something. You know, hopefully Tony doesn't jump off their bandwagon because they could be big stars for this company. Miro is pissed off at Malachi Black. So I'm sure that feud will suck because it involves the House of Drek. Then we had Nyla Rose and Marina Shafir versus Thunderstorm. Get it? Thunderstorm? Because it's Thunder Rosa and Tony Storm teaming. And they both got Thunder and Storm in their names. It's poetic. FTR did a promo promoting a match that I actually would like to see. And the best part is that it is promoting a rematch with the Briscoes on a pay-per-view that is not an actual AEW event. So I at least know I'll be watching the Ring of Honor special for that match alone. That and to also see Samoa Joe versus Jay Lethal, since apparently that's not going to happen on an AEW pay-per-view either. It is two matches that I am more interested in seeing over anything on that trashy Forbidden Door show. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say the all-time classic pay-per-view. All seriousness, though, I hope that ROH show actually draws well, because FTR and the Briscoes round 2, that sounds like a lot of fun. It'll sure be better than this AEW World Title main event. Jon Moxley versus the other Brody. The first singles match for Brody that I remember seeing in AEW, and it's him wrestling for their top belt because he won a crappy battle royal the week before. Because rankings matter, right? And we got approximately 2 minutes into this match before they both took the fight out to the floor while Paul Turner stood in the ring watching them fight like an idiot. Issuing a 10 count, by the way, even though both guys were fighting on the floor for well over a minute. Had the usual fake forearm exchanges from both guys. Always nice to see. I've seen Rats have more convincing fights. And they did some more stuff. I was bored to tears watching this match, and then somehow Mox won with the Bulldog choke. Here's what I've determined about Brody King. Had he just debuted as a big tattooed monster, gone through a series of squash matches, and they'd have actually built him up in any capacity for this spot, I'd probably have a higher opinion of the guy. Unfortunately, all I have to do is mention the name House of Black and it kills all of his credibility instantly. Because the guy's got a unique look. He would definitely stand out in an airport. He doesn't have a great body or anything like that, but he's got some mass. Like I said, if they focused more on him in a singles role and tried to actually get him over, I could have probably gone in caring more. And then, of course, they end up beating him flat with a submission, so now the monster heel is just another geek on the roster because this company has no idea how to get anybody over. Looking back, they ought to have closed with the TNT title match because at least the finish to that felt like a better way to go out. The fans were at least hotter for Wardlow winning the TNT title than Moxley having a mediocre TV match with a guy on the roster they'd never done anything with. But again, we all know my thoughts on Moxley at this stage, and nothing he ever does in the ring is going to change my mind about what I think of him as a worker. At this point, I'm mostly just counting down the weeks until he gets CM Punk back so they can do their Moxley Punk match and Punk can go over and we can get back to him as the top guy. Because we've been there and done that with Moxley, and all we got out of it was a botched exploding barbed wire death match. And I'm really not interested in seeing anything else from him. I miss MJF. And Danielson. And Punk. Yeah, this show really sucks without those guys. Even with Wardlow winning the TNT title, it still wasn't enough to save this show. What are they building towards next? Is it All Out in September? I think that's what the giant banner read in the arena. Sure as hell have no idea what they're promoting after watching this show, but with AEW, it's usually the format of poorly build up one or two programs here and there and then announce a bunch of last-minute throw-ins for no reason. So we'll see if they take that same approach for the end of the summer. But my God, this show is just awful. Just an awful, nonsensically put-together TV program. But enough of that show. Let's move on to World Class Championship Wrestling. This would be July 9th, 1983. And we are now post-Star Wars for the tapings from June. And now we are building to... Well, interestingly enough, according to the wiki page, there was the Reunion Arena Star Wars that they taped on June 17th. Obviously, those were the ones that aired over the last 2 weeks that we just recapped. Apparently, there was also an Independence Day Star Wars that was taped on July the 4th, very, very shortly after the June show. And if we end up actually seeing those matches aired on delay, I imagine that'll be something that's several weeks out from now. So we'll keep our eyes peeled for that. Nothing was ever mentioned about it here, though. And we open with our first match, sanctioned by a legendary drunk Mark Lorenz, introducing the opening bout, Chris Adams versus Johnny Mantell. And by the way, no, Lorenz wasn't actually drunk. It was just very poor audio. Bill Mercer was also pretty wobbly during this match, too. It's always fun to go back and listen to glitchy technology. Back when you used to call them tapings instead of whatever we call the modern term for recording TV programs. DVR, I guess. Anyway, this is a good babyface match. The idea here was that they were going the full 10-minute Broadway, so most of the match was mat holds and slow building offense until they got to the last few minutes and started milking some false finishes. Ends up with both guys doing a double drop-down clothesline spot in the last minute or so, and after exchanging a few cradle pins, they roll to the outside while the time expires, and really nothing else beyond that. Mercer talked about how Adams is still immersed in the whole Devastation Inc. drama, which it actually took me until he mentioned that to remind myself that was even a thing. And I think I've talked about this before, how, Chris Adams ends up becoming a pretty big stable piece for the Dallas region during his tenure, but ever since he first showed up, it feels like he's just kind of toiling. I remember he had that one match with the Mongol, which they hyped up for a while. Beyond that, though, like, his role on World Class has mostly been relegated to fast-paced undercard matches with a bunch of job guys. Like I said, I know he ends up getting involved with a whole lot more than that, but man, it feels like it's taken forever to get there with him. So coming back from the break, we had a David Von Erich interview to recap the situation from the Reunion Arena show. Actually, two situations from the show. The first thing they cover is the run-in during the Kevin Von Erich Harley Race World title match. And they show the clip of the deal at the end where he ran down to check on Kevin, who was nursing the shoulder injury. And after Harley had booted David in the side of the head, that is when he ran in for the DQ after being disrespected. And then he cuts a very odd promo where he basically says Kevin could have hypothetically won the world title had it not been for the shoulder deal, but he didn't. And then he talks about how when he and Harley get in there, David is going to walk out as a champion. But I don't know. The way David was explaining the Kevin situation, I think a lot of modern fans would interpret that as him teasing like a heel turn. And I mean, I could totally see that with the way the delivery came off. Like, he just basically flat out said, I don't care that I got Kevin DQ'd. It happened, I'm over it sort of deal. Just sounded very strange. But they very quickly turned the attention to the Jimmy Garvin Texas Heavyweight title finish, where, if y'all remember, Sunshine had held down David's foot so that Garvin could get the cheap pin. And then they held the belt up afterwards because of the controversial finish. So now we know the stipulation for the rematch. There is going to be one final match with the loser of the fall having to be the valet for the winner. And the segment got hilarious as David begins describing what the scenario would look like with Gorgeous Jimmy and Sunshine as David's personals. I believe lines that included him telling Jimmy that he will be plowing his fields and cutting his grass with one of those old school manual blade cutters. I believe he also said, in more blunt terminology, he was going to make him clean up horse poop. And then he tells Sunshine that she can do his laundry, clean his home, and cook him steak. A statement that would have probably made David the biggest heel in the business by today's standards because of, misogyny and all that BS. I don't know, I thought it was funny. But this is a great little sit-down. And now I can look forward to the vignettes of Jimmy Garvin cleaning out horse stalls and Sunshine being forced to do laundry and cook against her will. That'll be some good Christian TV right there. Up next, we had Chavo Guerrero versus, I believe, our first sighting of Rip Rogers on World Class Television. Around this point, I believe he was also working job matches on Mid-South Television. It's actually probably my earliest memory of seeing Rogers wrestle. I believe he started in Paffo's ICW in the late 70s, but I've never seen any footage of it. What with little ICW content is actually available out there on YouTube. Here's what I will say about Rip. Specifically for anyone in the business today that is looking to actually incorporate elements of comedy in their matches, here's how you do it the right way. Go back and watch tapes and clips of Rip Rogers and study the way that guy worked. He is the perfect model of somebody that knows how to add comic relief to a match without exposing the business. In fact, this whole thing was essentially a comedy match, but whereas in today's wrestling culture, comedy matches are just inane and childish because of the jag-offs in the business, this was an actual pro wrestling match that incorporated comedy without being over the top. And here's how they did it. Chavo Guerrero is a fantastic athlete, so he essentially out-wrestled and outsmarted Rip for the entirety of the match. And, Rip would do subtle heel things, like there's a spot where Chavo did the back roll through to his feet after the clean break from the ropes, and then Rip tried the same thing like a minute later, but he ended up just taking a flat back bump because he couldn't actually roll himself over. And it got a fucking great crowd response because, from their perspective, the heel just tried to imitate one of the babyface's crowd-pleasing moves, and he failed. So he looked like a jackass. I love the spot later on, too, in the match where Chavo's working over Rip on the mat, and he's got his legs spread outward while he's doing a handstand. And while Rip is trying to sit up to get some leverage and, slap Chavo in the face, there's Chavo kicking Rip in the face and knocking him back down while the ref's trying to count his shoulders. Just fucking phenomenal stuff. A textbook example of, yes, you can do comedy and have fun in wrestling without making the business look phony and stupid. And you don't need fucking blow-up dolls and furniture or exploding barbed wire to do it. So this is fantastic, and I highly encourage people to watch Rip Rogers clips anytime you get the chance. If you're a wrestling historian or you know a little bit about classic wrestling content, yeah, Rip Rogers was never a big star in the business. In fact, he never really branched out beyond the mid-card in any territory he was working with. Whether it was ICW, Mid-South, or in the latter years when he was up in Canada and Stampede Wrestling. But he's a great talent and somebody worth checking out in your spare time. Then we had Mike Bond versus Mr. Ebony, who I believe debuted on World Class a few weeks back. And this was not something that I would recommend you go out of your way to check out in your spare time. I believe we established last time that Mr. Ebony was Tom Jones, who was mostly noted for his work in the 70s. And the guy had dabbled around in a lot of territories all over the country. I think we mentioned a few of them. He worked in places like Florida, Memphis, Detroit region. I think I saw somewhere he also wrestled in Portland. That's Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine, for those of you wondering. And there are plenty of clips on YouTube if you're all are interested in checking him out. But, he's another guy that unfortunately I just really didn't grow up watching. But mainly the match was a showcase piece for him. Ended up going over with the full Nelson. And the deal with him right now is they're getting him over with his association with Skandar Akbar and Devastation Incorporated. So it's effective for what they were trying to do. I also appreciated them cutting to the crowd after the match to show all the single-toothed redneck fans in the front row shouting, "You ain't nothing, boy. Come on over here and start something." Back when heels were actually heels and the people were actually trying to jump the guardrail to get at them. And Akbar did a promo afterwards. I wrote pretty much nothing down about it. The Mongol was still wearing his weird-looking garb made of sheepskin. It is still hideous. And the main event is Terry Gordy and Kerry Von Erich in a lumberjack match, otherwise known as Freebirds versus Von Erichs Part 72. It's the how many different variations in match gimmicks can we come up with to pin 6 guys against each other in some form or fashion? Well, somehow they figured out a way to keep it fresh for about a year and a half until it all went to shit. The Lumberjacks were mostly split 50-50 between faces and heels. It's always great noting the attention to detail of having the baby faces on one side of the ring and the heels completely separate from them. It is something you would figure would be commonplace in the business today, but you rarely ever get something that basic. I did enjoy the spot early on in this match where, as I wrote down here, Jimmy Garvin was being Jimmy Garvin. Gordy's got Kerry in an armbar at one point, and the crowd is trying to rally behind Kerry to make his comeback, and meanwhile, they cut the camera to the outside to show Garvin telling the fans to keep it down while Gordy is working. Very disrespectful of the Dallas faithful. Most of it was racking up to the finish. There's a spot toward the end where Jimmy Garvin gets involved and picks at Kerry's ankle to trip him up, trying to get back in the ring. So the Iceman starts stalking him. This then caused the camera to miss a pretty important near fall because they were filming the Iceman chasing Garvin around ringside. Meanwhile, we missed Gordy actually going in for the pin on Kerry. But it ends up with Bruiser Brody picking at Gordy's ankle and tripping him up so that Kerry can small package him for the 3 count. And of course, after the bell, everything broke down into the giant brawl. And the show closed with Jimmy Garvin promoting a match next week with Kevin Von Erich. And he informs us that he wanted to face David, but he's too chicken to face him. Just like Kevin is too chicken to put his American heavyweight title on the line against Garvin because he's afraid he'll lose it. And my final note on world-class television this week reads, and I quote, "Remember when heels were actually effective at being douchebags that you wanted to see get punched in the mouth? Yeah, those times were better." Very enjoyable show. Great stark contrast with all 4 matches. They're obviously setting the stages for some of the new talent that's been showing up in the Dallas region around this point. Bruiser Brody ends up becoming a big factor with the main event picture going forward. Technically, him and Kerry are now the American Tag Team Champions after they dethroned Hayes and Gordy at the Reunion Arena show. So we will see where he stacks up with all this. It is important to note, though, they did shoot an angle with him and Kamala at the Reunion Arena event as well, so they've also got him lined up in a couple different positions right now. But it'll be interesting to see what they do with Brody going forward. But, yeah, that'll take us to the end of this one. Again, no episode of WCW this week because of the 86 Bash Tour, so we will resume next week when they are back for the Saturday night tapings. And as always, thank you for stopping in to check out this episode of the 5 Starr Wrestling Report podcast. Real quick before we end the show, I did want to provide I guess you could say an official update on what I'm going to be doing for the upcoming Monday shows. After last week's rant about how god-awfully boring Rampage is, I think I've about tapped out with that program for the foreseeable future. Until I see any kind of concerted effort to change up the formatting of that show to make it a worthwhile show to discuss, I pretty much said my piece on Rampage. So we will be instituting a replacement segment for the Monday show, which will mostly be an extension of the Retro Review series. I talked about how I wanted to add some WWF/WWE content to this channel, aside from the monthly premium live event specials we review each month. And while I know beginning an archival recap series of Raw from 1993 is probably not the greatest place to start when reviewing WWF history, let's be honest, the more you look back at WWF's library, there ain't a whole lot of great places to start reviewing anywhere. However, as someone who was avidly watching Raw around that point, figured it'd be fun to go back and check out some of those old Raw programs and see how they stack up years later. For a lot of those shows, basically from, I would say about 93 to 96, they would be television shows that I would be seeing for the first time in Lord knows how many years. But it'll be something that we can review each Monday. The earlier Raw shows are only about a 45-minute runtime, so it'll be about the same length we'd be reviewing an episode of Rampage or an old territorial show like World Class TV, for example. But it's a whole different cast of characters and personalities, and now you'll get a chance to hear my thoughts on what I thought of the cartoon era of the wrestling business. There will be some ups and downs for sure, but at least I'll probably get more entertainment value out of it than anything AEW is currently giving me on Friday nights. Or Saturday mornings, because I watch the shows on delay. So stay posted for that. In addition to the NWA Power reviews and other weekend pay-per-view recaps, we will keep going with the Power reports for the foreseeable future. But just a little bit of a way to shift things up and change up the Monday formatting. So we'll see how that ventures going forward. Anyway, take care all. Peace out.